Hi folks, this is Pastor Andy Lake with Liberty Bible Church. I've had several questions come in recently on different subjects, and I thought, what better way to try to answer these, because I'm sure if one person's asking, maybe multiple people are asking these same questions. And generally speaking, when it comes to issues of faith and questions of what God's Word or perhaps philosophical understandings of God Himself. Generally speaking, if you were to get in a setting where people are asking questions, you can pretty much guess the main questions that are going to be repeated over and over again. Now, that is not to say that the questions are foolish. What that actually means is that the questions are extremely valid, and that these questions are things that we ought to learn how to reason. We need to try to understand better. There are many questions that come over the nature of God, trying to explain or maybe validate certain issues of the faith. And so I wanted to try to take a little bit of time here over the course of the next few weeks and do the best that I can to answer some of those questions. Today's question is one that I have been asked many times, but it resurfaced on me again this week specifically, and I thought, I really need to take a little bit of time to do the best that I can to respond. The question is basically this: if God knows our frame, if He put us together in our mother's womb, if He is so actively involved, then why in the world would He allow someone to go through the pain that He foresees? And so, for example, if God knows that someone is going to be is going to go through an immense sickness or what have you, why would God allow that to take place, essentially, is the question that it comes down to. And generally speaking, when we answer questions like this, we like to point to the free will of man, but oftentimes we just leave it there. And sometimes people say, well, God is all-powerful, but man still has a choice. And then we just stop. I'm sorry, but that in and of itself is not a very solid response. And so we need to dig a little bit deeper. Now, I'm not saying that the response is incorrect, because yes, God is sovereign, God is in control, but man does have a free will. But the question comes in, if God is in control, how can man have a free will? And I've even been asked by others that if I truly believe that man has a free will, does that not challenge the sovereignty of God? And I don't believe that it does. If I was to say, look at it from this perspective, I believe that God is sovereign. We see His sovereignty in several different areas. For example, we see His sovereignty in His creating. He is able to create something out of nothing. He's able to speak time into existence. He's able to speak the worlds into existence. He's able to speak space into existence. And so we see just how powerful and how ruling, how in control He is by the very fact that He creates. And one of the other three ways, should I say, there's three basic ways that we see the sovereignty of God. One of the other ways is that of preserving. God's able to preserve His Word. He's able to preserve His people. The fact that not only does He set things in motion, He keeps things in motion. He sustains. So not only does He create, but He sustains. And then another way that we see the hand of God is in His providence. One author, in speaking of the providence of God in reference to the book of Esther, he says, God is the hand inside the glove of history. The providence of God is the hand that is working in the glove of history. So, we can look at a lot of these different things, and we can see how sovereign God is. But then when the question of free will steps into the picture, we wonder, okay, now wait a minute. If man has a choice, does that not negate the sovereignty of God? Or if God is in control, does that not negate the free will of man? And I don't believe that it does. Because for me to say that man having a choice in the matter would negate the sovereignty of God is a very challenge to the sovereignty of God to begin with. I've heard some who would say that in order for me to claim that man has a choice in the matter, be it over salvation or over whatever it may be, some will say that man has no choice, and that man is unconditionally chosen by God to be saved. He has no choice in the matter. To do that, I've had others tell me that it is a challenge to the sovereignty of God to say that no, man does have a choice. But the way I see God is a little greater than that, a lot greater than that. Let me explain it this way. God is outside of time. Now, for me to place him inside of time, I can understand where man's free will would challenge the sovereignty of God. But because God is outside of time, he is able to give man free will and still know the outcome. We think of free will in terms of choices, and if I as a father were to give my children choices, I don't necessarily know what choice they're going to make. I can teach them, I can train them the right way to go, but then when I send them out on their own and to make their own decisions, to make their own choices, I'm not 100% positive what direction they'll go. I can hope that they would make the right decision, but see, I'm not God, and my knowledge is limited. I cannot place those same restrictions on God and say that since I'm limited and since my understanding is lacking, then God's must be as well. But for me to say that by giving mankind a choice, then God is limited now in his sovereignty, is to place those limitations on God that I have on myself. If I was outside of time, and let's look at it from this perspective. Let's say that I decided I wanted to watch the 2000 Stanley Cup Finals again, and I already know who's going to win. Or perhaps I want to watch the Thrilla in Manila, and I want to watch Muhammad Ali and George Foreman duke it out. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching on maybe ESPN Classic, or I pulled it up on YouTube or whatever it may be, and I'm watching this fight scene, and I know what the outcome's going to be. I know what's going to happen with the fight. But I'm not the one making the choices in the matter. I'm not the one making the decision. I just know what's going to happen. Because I know what's going to happen does not mean that I have affected the outcome of the fight. I just know. Now, if I was to sit down, say I sat down with my son, and I said, okay, Gabriel, let's who do you think's going to win? And he's looking at Foreman, and he says, I think Foreman's going to win. And I'm looking at Ali going, I think Ali's going to win. And he says, well, you want to make it interesting? And I said, sure. He says, well, loser has to rub mom's feet for an hour tonight. And I say, all right, you're on. And I'm looking at him going, my bet is going to be on Muhammad Ali. He says, well, mine's on George Foreman. The difference is he's maybe not seen that fight, but I have. And so I'm able to look and I'm able to say, well, I'm going to go this side of the argument while you're going to that side. And my foreknowledge helps me to make the decision that I'm making. it lets me know what the outcome will be before the end of the fight. Now, God is outside of time at all times. He created time, and so therefore, since He's outside of it, He is able to see the beginning and the end at the same time. This is why His book is a prophetic book. It's able to be a prophetic book because He is outside of time. And He's able to show the prophets of the Old Testament. He's able to show Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel. He's able to show them what's going to come because He's outside of time. Now, being that He is outside of time and knows the decisions that are going to be made and knows the choices that man is going to do, gives Him the sovereignty or gives Him validation, should I say, to the sovereignty. Because not only is He able to see it, He is now able to give man free will, and it doesn't change His plans. God is able to know before tomorrow the decisions that you will make. And as a result of His foreknowledge, He predetermines certain things for your life. Now, as I look at some of these different things and I see how God is all-knowing and He's all-powerful and He's outside of time in this way, and because of that, I'm able to see His sovereignty now. He gives to me a choice. And he knows the choice I'm going to make, but He still gives it to me. You go back in time and you see this played out. You see it played out through the people of Israel. God made a promise, and He says, from your seed, Abraham, from your seed, from your offspring, not offsprings, but offspring, one, all the world will be blessed. And He was talking about the Christ that was going to come through the seed of Abraham. This is why, if you were to read the book of Esther, so to speak, and you see where Mordecai is talking to Esther, he knows. He says, even if you go and you die and everything, we're still going to be okay. Mordecai knew that God was not going to allow His people to be wiped off the face of the planet. He knew it. And so we see in this where nothing of man's doing can thwart the plans of God. Now, if I understand God from that perspective, and I understand that He's able to see the good that's going to come into my life as well as the bad that's going to come in my life. This is where Paul wrote in Romans 8:28. He says, and we know that all things work together for good. Go back to Genesis and you see Joseph and his brothers hated him and sold him into slavery. He makes his way into Potiphar's house. He does amazing things. He is successful beyond words, and Potiphar has blessed him and put him in charge of his entire house. Next thing you know, Potiphar's wife accuses Joseph of trying to make the moves on her, and so Joseph ends up in prison. And then from being sold into slavery, a slave in an Egyptian house, and then now he's a prisoner in an Egyptian prison, and then he grows in that position as well, and he's successful there. And then eventually he makes it as the second in command, only person that was higher than him in the whole nation of Egypt was the Pharaoh himself. And so his brothers come and beg him for forgiveness. And what does Joseph do? Joseph doesn't say, yeah, you were jerks. Yeah, you all were mean to me and you sold me to slavery. And how could you do that? And I can't believe God would allow that to happen. What does he say? No. While you were doing evil, God took it and used it for good. And because God allowed Joseph's brothers to cause him to have to go to Egypt, to be a slave in Egypt, because God allowed that, the people of Israel were preserved. And so here we have the people of Israel now. They are being able to survive this famine because the famine in Egypt had made its way to Canaan. You see, God knew what he was doing. We look at Job, for example. And think about this for a moment, because right now we've got a lot going on in our world, in our nation, with all this COVID stuff taking place. And yes, I believe with all my heart, I believe that Satan can use this to try to divide and try to weaken the church. I do believe that. I agree with that. However, who was attacking Job? Satan. Satan was the one attacking Job. But who allowed it? God. Not because he was trying to be vindictive or because he was trying to be mean to Job, but because he knew that as a result of this, Job was going to come out of it stronger than he was before. And as a result of that, the people around Job were going to see God move in a miraculous way. And we now today, thousands upon thousands of years later, we're looking back at the story of Job and at the account of what took place in his life. And I truly believe that it's a historical account, not just a story. But we're able to now look back at the life of Job, and we're able to see, wow, God was faithful. And Job's faith never failed. If Job could have a faith like that, I can too. And so when we look and we see, why does God allow, or why is there, sometimes the question may be posed this way: if God is loving, why is there pain and suffering in the world? Let's never thrust upon God the responsibility that is yours and mine. You see, God does step in from time to time. Perfect example. People do want to know, why isn't God stepping in and putting a stop to this or putting a stop to that? Why is he allowing this or why is he allowing that? And I understand those questions. But there's also times where God does step in and people get upset. Think for just a moment. Go back into Genesis or into Exodus, and then as you make your way out of the Exodus, you see where the Canaanites have occupied the land. God's people, Israel, have stepped in, and then you find yourself in the book of Joshua. And what does God say to do? He says, wipe them out. And people go, wait a minute, that's a horrible God. I can't believe that he would do something like this. Why in the world would God want those Canaanites wiped out? Don't forget that he gave them centuries to clear things up, to clean things up, to turn back to him, to turn to the one true God. They served a God that was called Molech. And what they had is they would have this, there was another God known as Chemosh in the Moabite world. And then even in the Greco-Roman days, you had gods of this nature too. But what they would do, the way that they would worship this God, and they would try to appease this God, if they were having a drought and they needed more rain, or if they were having bad harvest and they thought that this God was mad at them, the only way that they could appease him was they had this furnace that was the shape of a human head, or a giant head that they believed was representative of their god Molech. And it would have these hands with big metal plates, brass plates or something, depending on the time, but in the specific one. But anyway, they would have these metal plates on these hands and a mechanism. And what they would do is they would heat that furnace up, and the head, the furnace that looked like a head, the big mouth, was wide open. And these hands and this mechanism with this metal plate would be right there, and they would heat that furnace up with fire and reminiscent of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what they would do is they would take their babies, their little babies, those little children, and they would place their babies on that metal plate that had just been heated up. And in that day, you would hear the drums beating and banging and slamming and pounding, and they would make the music and the drums as loud as they could to drown out the screams of the babies being placed on those hot plates. The mechanism would then throw that baby into the mouth of the furnace. That was the image that those people had presented of God. And they would make that music so loud that the mothers could not hear their babies in torment. These were the people that God said, go take care of them. If we were around during that day, some of us might say, why would God allow this to take place? He steps in. And then what do we hear? Why in the world would God treat that group of people that way? You see, we can't have it both ways. We've got to come to the understanding that to let God be God. He is only allowing things to take place for a season. We got to remember, there are people that need to know Jesus Christ. And there is coming a day where God is going to stop it all. There's coming a day where His patience will be worn out. The Bible refers to Him as slow to anger and abounding in grace. And I'm so thankful that He was slow enough to anger to let me come to know Him as personal Savior. I'm so glad that He was patient with me. And I pray that as we move forward in these days and we see vile, horrible things taking place in and around our culture, as we see these things going on, I pray that God will put a stop to it. But I also pray that God will use it and use it in a way that brings glory and brings people's attention to Him. I hope this helps. And again, we need to remember who God is. We need to try to understand Him better. So if you have any questions along these lines, please, by all means, let me know. You can email us together@growinliberty.com, or you can get on one of our social platforms @growinliberty, and or use the contact links on our website, growinliberty.com or .org. God bless you. I hope to get to talk to you again soon, and I pray that this was an encouragement for you. You all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week.